Donald Trump has announced sweeping new tariffs in what's been described as a watershed moment for global trade. In an hour-long speech on what he called America's Liberation Day, he set out a 10% tariff on goods from most countries being imported into the US. And there were even higher rates for what he calls the worst offenders. But some have questioned the calculations used to work out these new taxes, as well as some claims made by the president.
The United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. We will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us.
During the press conference, we saw a sort of scorecard held up. It showed the tariffs Trump says countries charge to America as calculated by the White House. In the right column, we saw what the Trump administration says it will now charge. But how exactly was each tariff worked out? The White House released this formula, which looks pretty complicated. It basically shows that the White House has looked up what's called the trade deficit for goods for each country. In this case, a deficit comes up if the US is importing or buying in more goods from a country than what it's exporting or selling to them. It then divides that number by the total value of imports. Then that's halved, as Trump said he would offer a discount. Some commentators have argued that these tariffs aren't reciprocal at all because they don't take into account existing tariffs or non-tariff barriers like paperwork that drives up the cost of doing business. Instead, it was worked out according to what would level out the US's trade with each country. And the UK?
The United Kingdom, 10%, and we'll go 10%. So we'll do the same thing.
Trump has seemingly broken away from the formula, imposing a minimum charge of 10%. The US doesn't currently run a goods deficit with the UK, according to the UK's official figures, although we've been hit with this baseline 10% tariff. And there's another wrinkle: UK and US data sets on trade between the two countries are different. The US figures include places like Guernsey and the Isle of Man, whereas the UK's don't. So there are still lots of questions being asked about the method used. A key part of Trump's economic vision is about boosting American industries like manufacturing and farming.
We're also standing up for our great farmers and ranchers who are brutalized by nations all over the world. Brutalized. Canada, by the way, imposes a 250 to 300% tariff on many of our dairy products.
He suggested that American farmers were suffering partly because of its trade relationship with Canada. It's one of the US's biggest trading partners, along with Mexico. They weren't included in this latest round of tariffs, but they've already been hit by levies on steel and aluminium, as well as newer taxes on car imports, just like the UK. And as for agriculture and dairy more specifically, it could be argued that the president's claim is misleading. Last year, Canada was the second highest importer of US dairy products, worth roughly $1.14 billion US. And those triple-figure tariffs only kick in on US dairy imports after Canada hits a certain level of sales that aren't taxed. This is from a deal that Trump negotiated during his first term in office. According to the International Dairy Foods Association, the US has never gotten close to exceeding those quotas or actually paying these charges. Trump claimed that during Biden's presidency, the US experienced the highest inflation in the history of our country.
We had virtually no inflation for 4 years, but after transitioning over to Sleepy Joe, it went from almost non-existent to the highest in the history of our country. They're the highest inflation in the history of our country.
US inflation did hit 9.1% in June 2022. It marked the highest level in 4 decades, following on from the invasion of Ukraine, as well as supply chain crunches seen in the wake of the pandemic. But it was still well below the record high of 23.7% seen in 1920, in the wake of the First World War. And after the more recent spike, inflation had slowed to 3% by January 2025, the last month of Biden's term, undermining Trump's claim further. It's also unclear what this new wave of tariffs might mean for prices in the future. Once they have come into effect, the value of the dollar could strengthen. That might push up costs for UK firms buying goods from overseas, which would likely be passed on to consumers through higher prices. But some economists say prices might drop initially. That's because firms that usually sell to the US might start sending their goods to countries like the UK instead, possibly leading to a surge of cheaper goods here. While there's still a lot of uncertainty, it marks a major change for consumers and businesses around the world.